Good evening and thank you for coming tonight. La Maison Médicale, Serge Balon-Perin and LIMS Laboratory in Belgium are starting a series of seminars and workshops to help you to discover a truly super organ and extreme complexity, the microbiome. La Maison Médicale, with the last technology, has now the opportunity to do sequencing in your gut bacteria and offer to patient treatments and nutrition advices. I would like to introduce you to Serge Balon-Perin, specialized in nutrition, University of Lausanne, UCL, Belgium, Vice President of the Scientific Committee of a Medical Analysis Laboratory specializing in nutrition biology and intestinal microbiota, and 3 years of research at the UCL in obesity.
I'm very pleased to be here among you tonight to talk about this famous microbiota. And the idea is for tonight is an introduction of why is it interesting for you, and especially for your patients, that you take care about the microbiota. The first lecture is about what I can call the extra-human organ with multiple powers, and you will see what are those multiple powers. And like said the famous Hippocrates, a long time ago, he said that every disease begins in the intestine, and I could say maybe every disease begins in the microbiota, and maybe not maybe every disease, but most of them. And what is the intestinal microbiota? The definition is that it's a community of microorganisms that reside in or pass through the digestive tract. There is the gut microbiota, who is the most important one, who is the master of the others microbiota. We know that, and there are many recent studies that show clearly that the composition of the gut microbiota will influence the composition of all the others microbiota, including the pulmonary microbiota. I will explain you later what it means. And then you have other microbiota, like certainly you know vagina, skin, and in other places. The microbiota is unique for each individual. We know there are 95% of the microbiota that everybody has, but in different amounts, and that's very important. And you have 5%, they are quite specific, that you have one and you don't, and another one. And the microbiota throughout life is not the same. For example, we know that people over 80 years old, when you make them a vaccination for influenza, for example, the response or the seroconversion is from 30 to 50% maximum. And what we also know is that if you give to these people probiotics at a high level, the seroconversion becomes higher. Then concerning immunity and response to vaccination, it's really important to take care of the microbiota. And now what's more interesting for you after this little introduction is to know how the microbiota is established, but more than that, what is its purpose? Generally, we think that the day before you were born, there's no bacteria at all in your gut, but it's not true. We know actually there's already a little bit of bacteria influenced by the composition of the gut of the mother. We know actually that the mother who has I would say an awful microbiota, the breastfeeding maybe will not be so good because she will give bad bacteria. We know that 70% of the bacteria are passing through the maternal milk. After that, progressively, there is a layer of bacteria who's formed, and there will be more rules for this microbiota. The first one is to protect the intestinal wall and ensure good intestinal permeability. And that it's very, very important. The intestinal barrier is absolutely essential in the different pathologies like immunity disease, obesity, diabetes, or concerning brain. The first point to assure gut permeability is the mucus. There is an interesting study where they used what we call gnobiotic mice, who was born by a cesarean birth delivery without microbiota, normally or close, and they will modify the microbiota. And in this case, they used two groups of mice. The first one, they didn't give them fibers, and the other one, they give them a diet with fibers. And after that, they give them enteric pathogen, and they make a cut section to see what's going on in the group who received a fiber-rich diet, and the other one was a fiber-free diet. And what we see is that the group they receive a fiber-rich diet, there's a lot of mucus, and the bad bacteria, the one you can see in the red one here, they didn't have access to the cells, and they didn't inflammate, and didn't create an inflammation in the intestine. For the other ones, with the fiber-free diet, the same enteropathogenic bacteria had a really inflammatory effect. And I will show you a case report for a patient with an irritable bowel syndrome. And this is a 62 years old patient. She came to my consultation and she has many symptoms. The first one is she gained weight since stopping smoking. It's not really a surprise, but she gained 10 kilos. And she can't lose them, even if she stopped bread, pasta, sugar, and different carbs. She was diagnosed as a pre-diabetes. She has digestive problems, and she is also tired and other symptoms. This is the way the representation of the microbiota is done by the lab. You have on the right side with a green, this is the ideal composition of the microbiota with a big different families. What if we hadn't taken biology? For example, without examination, you just see the patient, she tell you that she has this, and this problem, and you say, okay, finally, she has an overweight, probably a pre-diabetes, I have to control that, and she has probably an irritable bowel syndrome. That's what you know. And you say, okay, I will give her a low-calorie or low-carbs diet. What can I say after that? That she has an overweight, slight diabetes, some deficiencies, she has no food allergy type 3, and she has no candidiasis. And what's going to be my attitude? I'm going to give her low-carb diet, certainly, metformin, probably, and correction of deficiencies. And what can you do now if you did the microbiota test? Your conclusions are the same, plus you know that this patient has a microbiota that predisposes to diabetes, and it means that your therapeutic attitude is going to be different, because in this case, we know that you will certainly not give her a protein diet or a keto diet. And it's more interesting to give a low-carb vegetarian diet, not too many proteins. There are many links that were discovered between the microbiota composition and the overweight, obesity, diabetes, NASH, the cardiovascular prevention, colon cancer prevention, IBS, IBD, allergy, autoimmune disease, depression, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson and Alzheimer. That's a lot, and it's not all, but that's already a lot of diseases that were certainly connected with the microbiota composition. To talk about briefly the link between the microbiota and the brain and the depression, anxiety, and other things, it started with the famous fecal transplantation studies. They transplant a microbiota for lean mice to an obese mice, and the obese mice became lean. and the other way. And also, they transplant a microbiota from a stressed mice to a cool mice, and the cool mice became stressed, and in the other way too. And all those studies showed that when you modify the microbiota, you can modify the mood of the mice. Another subject is the microbiota and obesity. I will show you this example of two people. They are coming to your consultation. And they say, okay, you know what, doctor, I would like to lose weight. And the only thing you can see is that they want to lose weight and they have a big belly, and that's it. But you don't know what's in it. You don't know what's the microbiota, if it's different, this one from this one. And if it's different, maybe the treatment will not be the same. You have the patient number 1, this is his microbiota, and the patient number 2, this is his microbiota. As you can see, they are quite different. Here is what we say the normal microbiota, and here you have patient 1, patient 2. And in this case, the idea is to follow a diet low in carbs, close to the keto diet, and you can increase the omega-3 and cranberry and grape. It could be interesting to do intermittent fasting. The patient number 2 is a bit like the woman with irritable bowel syndrome and insulin resistant. It's a little bit the same situation here. Then you see that's completely different. And in this case, the diet will be more specifically to avoid the Western diet than red meat, deli meats, processed food, fats such like this, and also sugar like usually. And it's more vegetarian with a lot of prebiotic and fiber in the diet. And it's got to be to promote oat flakes, all this type of berries, lentils, chickpeas and everything. Also artichoke, asparagus, onion leeks, garlic and everything. With olive oil, certainly fatty fish for the omega-3. You will prefer carbs with a low glycemic index, like the quinoa, steamed potatoes, and after that, you know that steamed potatoes, and after that you put them in the fridge, and the day after you do a salad with that. And we know that they are rich in resistant starch, as we say that. And the glycemic index is completely different with a cold potatoes than in a puree, for example. In a puree, it's 100%. Poof. In a salad with cold potatoes, the index is 30, and the other one is, in the puree, it's 100. Another point is the microbiota and cancer. Since many years, we know that the colon cancer is related to what you eat. It's not a scoop. We know that if you eat a lot of fibers, a lot of vegetables, and if you don't eat too much meat, you reduce your chance to develop a colon cancer. The diet is related to the cancer, the diet is related to the microbiota, and they are both related to the cancer, and also the diet and the microbiota are considering also the earth's metabolism and immunity are related to the cancer. The way you eat and the way you will modify or modulate your microbiota will play a role in what we call the primary prevention. That it means what's the primary prevention it's what you can do to avoid to develop a cancer. Will play a role in the tertiary prevention. It means what you're going to do to avoid recidive. You can say that. The microbiota could reduce chemotherapy and radiotherapy side effects, and more specifically, the side effect of the chemotherapy on the diarrhea, the famous diarrhea, inflammation, and the mucitis, and the inflammation of the mouth with the chemotherapy. We know that the microbiota plays a role on the digestive system cancer, and for sure for the colon cancer, that's what we know, but also on extradigestive cancer. To end the session, I will talk about what's good food for your microbiota. You know, first one is this one. You recognize it. Pay attention with that. You know, because if you eat too much, you will be bloated like you've never been in your life. Garlic and onions, fantastic. The artichokes, bananas, these are very, very important. Then the grenade, and all the berries. And finally, if the situation is completely desesperated, if you try many treatment, many diet, and it's not getting better, you should be able to do a fecal transplantation. We know that even if you make a transplantation, a fecal transplantation, the microbiota directly after the transplantation will be completely different. But we also know that if you check what's going on 1 year after that, the microbiota is already start to become like it was before. It's not forever. I will finish with this interesting study made by the Boston Children's Hospital, and they give what we call poop in a pill, and they have quite good result. Finally, they said they have 90% of success. I'm a bit surprised by this, because I think that it's not like a fecal transplantation, and I think the fecal transplantation is certainly better. The way you can modify the microbiota of your patient and you can control is absolutely more interesting and affordable for many of you. Voila, I hope that you are interested to go further in the microbiota story. Thank you.
Okay, I have the notion that there is a strong difference for the babies who are born through the normal way, the natural way, and the babies coming out from a cesarean section.
Exactly. Then there is a huge difference, and that's what I said before. It's that the natural birth is very important for the constitution of the microbiota, even if there is other steps like the breastfeeding and the quality of the microbiota of the mother, but it's important also for the birth itself. Our kids, they have to take antibiotics because they have, I don't know, a kidney infection or many other reasons. That's not good either. And all those things could have an effect.
I would like just, you mentioned very briefly about fasting. I wanted just to know what is the impact on the microbiota, the fasting. Is that all good or bad or?
All right. Then there are different types of fasting. There is the intermittent fasting, then it's quite short period, it's 16 hours, and that's the idea. And we know that's interesting, specifically for different bacteria like the Akkermansia, things like this. There's another way, it's what we call the fasting mimicking diet. I don't know if you heard about that. It's a diet that looks like fasting, but it's not. If mice are not eating before chemotherapy, and the first day of chemotherapy, they have less side effect of the chemotherapy, and the effect of chemotherapy is better. The fasting mimicking diet is really interesting in cancer prevention, for the microbiota too, and it's a diet where you really eat a little bit of different things. You can go to internet, you tap a fasting mimicking diet, you will see what it is practically, and it's a diet for 5 days, and it's interesting to do it. Not all the time, you do it maybe every 3 months, or maybe every 6 months, or every year. And then you have the fasting, the complete fasting for 1 week, for example, or more. And this is really important to know what's your microbiota before you do that. Because there are bacteria, they are eating everything. They are eating carbs, they are eating proteins, and they are eating your mucus. And if you don't give anything to them, they will eat your mucus, and then you will feel perfectly well during your fasting period, but the thing is your microbiota will not getting better with this period, and when you will start to eat again, your microbiota will be more inflammatory than it was. Fasting is interesting, but check your microbiota before.
Jack, I have a quick one as well. I have been a high-level athlete by the past, and I was curious to know if by any chance it would be possible to elaborate, to imagine a kind of solution, why not increasing or to prevent the performance of high-level athletes?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question, because we know that in sport, at the high level sport, is not good for health. And if not a good microbiota, and that's what you find in some sport players, that they don't pay attention to their nutrition, you can easily have this famous low-grade inflammation. And what happens to a sportive with a low-grade inflammation is what occurs is injuries, different muscular injuries, joints injuries, and things like this, and a low level of recuperation. And they can start to have also food intolerance. I think it's very important to pay attention to the microbiota in a high-level sport players. Yeah, thank you again.